Hello, America. Welcome to Your Leo Nation, where we believe in and support the rule of law. I am the Chief, Mark Garrett, and with us today is our good friend who we've had on the show a couple of times already. He's always an outstanding guest, and that is Sam Faddis. Sam, thank you and welcome for joining us here at Your Leo Nation once again.
Always fun. Thank you very much.
Well, as many of you know, some of you may not know, Sam is a former CIA operations officer and is steeped in everything intelligence in the federal government and in our intel agencies. Sam, you and I were having just a casual conversation just a couple of weeks ago, and about a number of things that I found fascinating. But one of those topics was about the threats to former President Donald Trump, and and you can get into how deep you want to about that, but you made it clear that you were concerned. Let's put it that way. That you were very concerned. I was too, but you seemed more concerned than I was, and I think it was prophetic. As soon as I saw this happen, took about 20 seconds, and my mind went right back to that conversation that you and I had a couple of weeks ago. And of course, the way I found you, Sam, it was in Primus that you write for occasionally. And that topic that I read, the first time I saw your name was about the CIA and why it no longer works and what the fixes are. And just recently, I think it was yesterday, you authored another article about the Secret Service, this incident. And that article is just perfect for today's podcast. So I really am glad that I waited to have you on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you want to, you can just talk about the article because it's absolutely up to date as of today's recording about what happened and your take on it.
Well, I mean, as you know, when I write, I try to write the same way I would have written as an intelligence officer. I don't mean stylistically that it's the same thing, but I just mean when you're an intel officer and you're providing intelligence, you should be providing, not to sound all old dragnet, but just the facts, right? I mean, what do you know? How do you know it? Not a bunch of conspiracy, not a bunch of, hey, a crazy guy who lives in a box under the overpass said the following stuff. And I think because of that, so I try to stay sober, hard hitting. If I feel like I'm standing on firm ground, I'll lay into the subject, but I want to be standing on firm ground. And as a consequence, periodically people will be looking at me and I basically sort of suggesting that I'm the one that's naive. Like I don't, which is a very strange thing as a cynical little case officer to be accused of. But anyway, meaning you haven't grasped the half of it, you don't understand. And what they're really saying is the only way something like Butler could happen if it was a conspiracy. Right? The only way a 20-year-old kid with an AR can end up on this roof with line of sight and relatively easy shooting distance of the president is if the Secret Service, the CIA, or everybody else involved. And my position is sort of like, in a very strange way, the people that say that are the ones that are being naive. Because the premise, the foundation that they don't even think about is the Secret Service is really good. The Secret Service is really squared away. Nobody could ever get near the Donald Trump with a rifle and shoot unless they let him do it and facilitate. And so, I've really been going with this article recently is, the terrible part here is that that certainly was true once upon a time, but it's no longer true. That's the horrible, horrible fact. They did the errors that occurred here, as you know, as well as anybody, are not like fine points of sophisticated protective detail voodoo. This is, what's the first thing we do? Secure all elevated firing positions within X number of hundreds of meters of the target, right? Given, boom. And then you don't say, just like in the military, you don't tell a private to go do something, and then if it doesn't get done, you say, well, it's his fault, I told him to do it. Yeah. It's not the way it works, man, whether it's law enforcement, intel, military. No, it was your job. If you assigned somebody to cover the roof, it was your job to make sure the roof was covered.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, again, as you know, I mean, we could go through the mechanics forever. Before Donald Trump walks out on stage, what's the last thing we're going to do before we give the green light for him to come out? Comms check with everybody in every location, confirmation, everybody's in position. Not should have, I told them to, they probably are there. Life doesn't work like that, man. I mean, not in this world. So these are fun breakdowns that are so fundamental that clearly what you are looking at least, it is an organization that's no longer capable of doing its job. I mean,
Sam,
that's the reality.
I believe you are correct. I had discussed this a couple of days ago on the show, and I kind of compared this assassination attempt, and it's awful. But of course, one person did lose his life, the firefighter. In that sense, the shooter was successful, not at his original target. But I did discuss this, and I compared it to a commercial airliner crash that almost always multiple things have to go wrong in order for some catastrophe like this to happen. And it certainly seems like multiple things went wrong here. And the first thing you talked about was line of sight. It's the first thing that I talked about as well on the previous show. Um, Communications, we discussed that as well. These are things that of course at a much higher level than myself, that you have been involved in for most of your professional life. I was as well. I worked very closely with the Secret Service. I was in the patrol cars. They were riding, as my passengers in the back seat. I had the president behind me on the lead vehicle, and the communications is nonstop. It's nonstop. And while you're in transit, and these agents talking to one another, have multiple agencies in my car, have maybe LAPD and Secret Service with me, so we have immediate direct communication. Um, so what you're saying, and for people who've not been involved in these types of operations, these types of protection details, it's very important for them to appreciate how true what you're saying is. I'll let you continue, but I just wanted to jump in there and really confirm what you're saying. These are fundamental. These are, I think, as you said it, whatever it was, 101. These are the most foundational, most basic aspects of dignitary protection, and it seems so many of these aspects were completely breached.
Yeah, this is this, and I guess where I'm also going with this is, I'm collecting my thoughts for a second, is you've got all of these things. This was not just what you're talking about. Means you're not just talking about a bad day, right? That's the real
Mhm.
crux of the matter, which is that the um, you didn't just happen to have some things go wrong here. You have an organization that just flat out can't do its job. Now, I'm not saying that all the guys and gals in the Secret Service are incompetent and nobody knows what it's not saying. As an organization, when you look at this, these guys, they can't perform anymore. They are not performing. And that, of course, the where I went with that in terms of the conclusion, or we're extrapolating from that in the article, is guys, based on the what I know and the contacts I have with the intelligence community, and a lot of work I'm doing with America First on planning for reforming the intel community. Secret Service is not an outlier.
Mhm.
Secret Service is not somehow randomly they're catastrophically bad. No, this is what all of these agencies have devolved to. And some of it is DEI stuff. Okay, yeah, but it's not just that. It's a whole, it's just flat out bureaucratization. I mean, honestly, at the risk of sounding like a crusty old guy, going soft. I mean, when the director of Secret Service, who, I know she came to the job from Pepsi, but before that, she spent something like almost 30 years in the Secret
Mhm.
Service, supposedly as an agent really doing the job. And her response to not putting people on the roof of the building from which the shot was taken was that it's a sloped roof and basically it's too dangerous to put somebody there. So that's insane. But she said it with a straight face to the camera, like that's her worldview.
Yes.
And her, as a supposed professional, getting on the roof is too dangerous for her people.
Sam, I have to, if you, pardon me, I just want to chime in because this is such an important point. And people will shake their heads like I was, like, you know, how is this possible? How could she possibly say such a thing? And we should. But I think that this is indicative of a much larger problem. And I'm sure this is, you know, you were hitting on this. In regards to this, I want to quote your article, just a piece of it. Whoever was running that show was responsible not just for assigning tasks, but also for confirming that they had been accomplished. There is no passing of the buck in the world of protective details. There are no assumption. The word should, quote unquote, is never used. You touched on that a minute ago, but I wanted to pull that out in a quote from your own article. But this relates specifically to the Director Cheatle's response in that interview. I was talking to a friend this morning about that response. As ludicrous as the response is itself, it goes beyond that. The first thing is, listen, I've been in the camera untold numbers of time, from officer all the way to chief. And of course, the higher up you go, the better prepared you better be for a particular question or sets of questions. And you would think the higher up you go, the more you'd be aware that you need to be prepared. In other words, this is my job to represent the agency. So number one, it seems like when someone asked the obvious question, this lady had plenty of time. And the reason is because there was a slow response in the first place. She didn't come out within an hour like I think that I would have, or my boss would have expected that I would have. But she came out very late with the response. So you would think in that time, geez, what might they ask me? Why wasn't there an agent? Why wasn't there an officer on that roof? It seems like she wasn't prepared for such an obvious question.
Right.
And number two, and this is where this really concerns me. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this goes back to Sam's first article that I alluded to at the beginning of the show within Imprimis. Please subscribe to Imprimis to get people like Sam that are writing common sense in there. But that was about the failures of the CIA, your old agency. And like you said a minute ago, this is endemic to the entire establishment.
Yes.
But number two, this is the leader. Number one, she wasn't prepared. Number two, this is the head, the director of the United States Secret Service, tasked with, among other things, protecting the president, vice president, former presidents, families, things like this. Heads of state from all over the world. She could not think on her feet quickly and clearly enough to give a more substantive answer, a more logical answer, or a more honest answer. How about, you know what? I should know the reason there wasn't a shooter there, and I don't. That's my fault for not knowing, but I'm going to find out and get back to you. She wasn't able to give a grown-up answer to such an obvious question. Right. That's just my editorializing and about what this implies as far as her ability to lead such a vital organization.
Yeah, well, I mean, and she was in the Secret Service for, again, I think it's like 28 years or something like that, before she left and went to Pepsi and then came back to this job. I would really like to know, and I haven't had the opportunity, actually, the time to focus on this. I'd like to know what she did in the Secret Service for 28 years. Like, while she was in the Secret Service, was she actually on the street with a detail doing this? Was that where, or are we dealing with another person that maybe spent a little bit of time on the street and then very rapidly ended up spending the rest of her career sitting behind a desk? I mean, all the time, I mean, you know, this is true in any profession, right? You've run into this yourself. Run into guys in the CIA who everybody wants to refer to as a spy and a spook, and you're like, yeah, I know him. Mm-hmm. And I think he did a tour in Vienna 30 years ago and drank a lot of wine and ate a lot of schnitzel. And then the rest of the time he's been sitting in headquarters. Mm-hmm. So don't talk to me about how, he's knows anything about operations, doesn't know any. The I just I guess coming back around is when you look at the and it seems like every day now, right? There's more revelations. When you look at the, the way this went down, you just realize this 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 was a clown show, but a really scary clown show. This is a disaster. This is, I mean, what was it earlier today? I was apparently there's information coming out that this kid roamed around multiple times in advance, which I wrote, and I think the first piece I wrote about this, it's obvious. He didn't climb on the roof not knowing that the roof was unsecure. He didn't climb up there with his long gun hoping nobody was holding the roof. He knew that. How did he know that? Well, either they told him, which is a conspiracy theory, or you know what? They let this dude roam around in the middle of their setup, observing and gathering information. And the latest that come out is at one point he was carrying a rangefinder as he did that, and they actually noticed him and even photographed him.
Yeah. Well, you know what he did, Sam? This kid, this monster, this murderer, he did reconnaissance.
That's right.
He did the job that the Secret Service was responsible for in order to protect their principal, their protectee. He did reconnaissance.
Well, he did the pre-attack surveillance, right?
Yes.
And everybody who understands how this business works understands that while you're figuring out where you're going to put your snipers and where the command post is and doing all that stuff, you can't allow the enemy to have the opportunity to simply observe you, gather information. So you have to have people dedicated to watching for that surveillance and preventing them from doing what this unsophisticated, probably completely psycho 20-year-old did, which is just roam around and make book on everything you're doing, to the point where he can say, hey, they haven't bothered to put anybody on that roof, and that looks like a good spot. I mean, we keep, this is the thing I think people really need to keep reminding themselves. Look at that totally unsophisticated, untrained 20-year-old kid from Pennsylvania who it smells like had some serious emotional problem. This wasn't Al-Qaeda. This wasn't Hezbollah. This wasn't anybody. Good Lord, he went straight through these measures like they didn't exist. Now, you're going to seriously tell me that service, the Secret Service, will protect anybody from Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or Hamas? Because those boys, against whom I have worked extensively, they're not stupid little 20-year-olds with no training. They're as hard as it comes and very sophisticated in all kinds of capabilities. Good God. I mean, at this point, I'm surprised that they could even secure the White House at this point, honestly.
Well, again, I've had conversations, I'm sure, as you have, with a number of people, and I came to the same, I think, quite obvious conclusion that, listen, I am thankful, but after this, I'm surprised that we haven't had other incidents.
Yes.
And apparently, maybe we have, according to some sources, a couple of weeks ago with the vice president. I'm not sure about that, but sometimes it's just pure stupid luck that something doesn't go wrong. That the bad person is not in the opportune location for something to occur. So, with that, Sam, and the reason I really wanted to talk to you today, because the current police officer and former, DEA agent friend of mine, Bill Bodner, we really beat this up heavily a few days ago about the tactics, things like this. I really wanted to dig down a little bit and get your opinion as to why and how did we get here. You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but how did we go from the scene that you and I can remember? We were alive and older at the time when Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. I think it was March of 1981 by John Hinckley Jr. And we remembered that robust response. And I think looking back at it, was there much that the Secret Service could have done than they did to prevent that? Maybe not. But this was a substantial bubble around the president. A bullet got through, hit a number of people, including Mr. Brady. But how do we go from that to where we are? What processes are in place or have been in place to have this agency and others evolve to where they are?
Well, I mean, as I talked about, you were talking about the article that I wrote for Imprimis, and I think I've hit these same notes in multiple ways, multiple times. I look at this as you've got at least two things going on. And we're talking about the Secret Service, but it's going on in all these agencies. The first is just flat out bureaucratization.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what somebody else who's cleverer than me calls bureaucratic hardening of the argument. We get bigger, more layers of middle management, more money, more people, but we don't get better. And we actually get fatter and slower bureaucratically. And I was talking to a guy in some meetings I was in the other day down in D.C. on Intel reform, and he's a former SF guy, and he was saying how he remembers when Army SF, the entire Special Forces of the United States Army, all the Green Berets were commanded by one full bird colonel.
Wow.
And now there are something like 23 general officers who command in their chain of command, and the top one is a 4-star. And then his point was, and our performance as Green Berets in A teams on the ground has definitely, I mean, if anything, has devolved as a consequence, right? It's instead of the focus on accomplishing the mission and doing the job and the hard edge aspect of it, it just gets bloated and bureaucratic, and standards get, standards deteriorate. And so that, I think, is just a huge part of it. And then the politicization, I mean, particularly this DEI business, right? And as I've always said, I don't really care. I mean, you should be, I care about ethnicity in the sense that I'm a big believer that everybody should be proud of where they came from and know their family history and remember that. I do a lot of genealogical research in my own family. So I'm all about that. Yeah, you should remember where you're from and be proud of where you came from. I don't care if it's, Ireland, the Dominican Republic, Ghana, whatever. But the only thing that really should matter, can matter, in what we're talking about is performance.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do your job at the level? And it's not just that we've gone, I don't think people appreciate the extent to which we have gone down this road. They kind of still think that, like, maybe people are getting preferences, or that guy didn't really deserve to be promoted. And we're way past that, man. I mean, quotas are mandated, right? Even in the United States Army now, you're recruiting in a certain area. What are the demographics? Your recruiting totals are mandated to equal those quotas, those percentages.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's insane, right? I mean, for a million different reasons, different ethnic groups choose all kinds of different, paths in life, right? I mean, good Lord, Jewish Americans are 2% of the population, and what percentage of attorneys, doctors, professionals? Right. Not because of some innate biological superiority, because for centuries they have focused on professions and success in that. So right. I'm guessing your recruiting totals of Jews that you're bringing into the United States infantry are probably pretty freaking low.
Pretty low.
And for whatever reason, the American Army, especially the infantry and special operations, is overwhelmingly white guys from small towns, rural areas, whatever, for whatever combination of socioeconomic. Not because somebody's preventing anybody else from enlisting.
Mm-hmm.
Who cares? I don't care. What I do care about is, are those guys actually capable of doing their jobs? And it has become mandated now. Yeah. That you must not just, you have to actually sort of swear allegiance to this concept of
yes.
And it is mandated on the job. And it is increasingly, I know this is absolutely true in CIA, people are afraid to manage, and they're afraid to lead, and they're afraid to discipline people. Because the first thing that happens is they get accused of having violated the rights of some group, and it is the manager or leader who suffers. And by this point, the number of such groups is so vast that virtually everybody can claim to be one of these groups,
Well,
because it's all based on sexual orientation and everything else now.
Sam, that point, all the points you made are valid. That last one is particularly impactful because there are so many protected classes now that they all apparently deserve the same level of attention, which is mathematically eventually impossible. Um, and when we're talking about, you know, people can say we're talking about, a particular group here, but in this case, I'm actually thinking about the size of the agents that surrounded Donald Trump. And
Absolutely.
when you look at this, I mean, there were some short people there. See, I won't even use any sexual identifiers here. I'm just going to say short people. And we look at the possible effect. Look, it's one of the things. Again, I was trained by the Secret Service a couple of times over the years. I worked with them so much, but I was never a Secret Service agent. But through osmosis and by some, 48-hour training
Right.
classes that I went through, I knew that was one of the most important things was to visually shield the principal, so it made him or her a more difficult target for a would-be assailant. And when you can't physically do that, it's like playing in the National Basketball Association and being 4'7" and not being able to do a layup or a slam dunk or get over the guard who's trying to prevent you from getting that basket. These are all just logical things. And I think when we take the emotion out of it and we take the claims of sexism or whatever it is, in other words, it would be no more beneficial to a protectee to have a 5'2" man than it would a 5'2" woman. And maybe there's a place here to reinstate standards to have a minimum height for, in this case, for agents that are protecting the president for obvious tactical reasons, not for any political reasons, not for any discriminatory reasons, but for practical reasons.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you've pointed out very correctly, and you get on, the height of the Secret Service detail around the president is a big deal, guys. Blocking view, blocking line of sight, blocking shots, as basic as that may sound, that's the key element. But let's add to this. You also got to be able to physically deal with the threats. Short of your answer to everything is shoot somebody, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hollywood has created this myth of 100-pound, 5'1" women who punch guys, and the guy flies across the room and goes through a plate glass window. In the real world, when the 100-pound, 5'1" woman hits him, all it does is anger him, and then he beats the living hell out of her, which is why we are so focused on domestic abuse now, because literally the husband can kill the wife when fired up, right? That's how that fight ends. That ends with her dead or in the hospital. So we're created this alternate universe in which that's not true. Now, if this woman that you're putting in this position can in fact perform those jobs and defend herself and do this, then God bless her. But if she can't, you saying you'd like to have more women on the detail is insanity. I mean, it's. I was watching, this is slightly off topic. There's an Army recruiting video going around with a tank crew, and they're on a gunnery range and they're engaging a target and shooting. And you see that from the tank commander, the guy who's got his head out of the hatch, from his perspective, basically, and they hit the target, first shot, boom, ceasefire, good job. And he looks down at the gunner, and in a tank, the gunner sits literally right below the feet of the tank commander. And the gunner looks up at him grinning, and it's this little girl, she's 18, 19, and she's probably like 100 pounds, and she's 5 feet tall. And the point is, this little girl just did that. This very small person did that. And isn't that cool? And she could do it as well as a guy. Well, okay, I was an armor officer. I was actually a tanker for a while. Can she move the controls that are all hydraulic? Yes. Is she going to be at least as good a shot as a guy is and get the target hit? Yes. You know what else she's got to do? because she's part of a 4-man or 4-person crew. She's got to be part of the crew that humps 130 rounds of main gun ammo up off the ground, up to the top of the turret, and then loads it down inside. And literally thousands of rounds of 50 cal ammunition. And when the tread falls off, each one weighs 3 tons. The crew has to actually, with cables and ropes, go through the god-awful process of putting that thing back on, which is one of the most back-breaking jobs you can physically imagine. And you do it more times than to remember. Okay, well, she can't do any of that. I mean, she can't pull her own weight, literally, in that position. So maybe it makes you feel better to put her in that job.
Right.
She can't do
it. It's what feels good. Go ahead.
Well, and not only can't she do it, but we all know that means that the lives of everybody around her are at risk, and her own life is at risk because she can't do it. My son was a Marine machine gunner, did 2 combat tours in Oman. They had female engagement teams, female Marines, that would go with them to interface with the populace, which makes some sense, especially in Pashtun culture. Only a woman is going to be able to talk to a Pashtun's female members of his family. But, everybody's carrying 130 pounds, and it's a zillion degrees outside. And so the way every foot patrol ends with the female engagement team is with the guys carrying the rugs and sometimes the weapons of the women, in addition to their own gear, because the women are now combat ineffective because they can't keep up. So now all the ladies are at risk, but also that entire unit is at risk, right? When they come under fire, the guys can't move, the guys are dead, all because somebody back home thought this was a great idea to integrate women into this. It's not, you're doing it because somebody has decreed that it fits with their ideology, and it doesn't work.
Well,
that's a piece of what we're seeing.
Yep. And I've been there, done that. I worked in recruitment for the Highway Patrol for a number of years. For 6 years, I worked in recruitment and saw this. And listen, I think this director here, if I read the article correctly a couple of days ago, she's pushing something called 30 by 30, 30% of the agents to be female by the year 2030. And again, this is not an attack on women at all. It's an acknowledgement that this particular job we're talking about right now requires certain physical attributes. By the way, especially when a protectee is the size of Donald Trump, by the way.
Yes. 100%.
I would have a tough time. I mean, I'm only 6 feet tall. Was he 6'3" or 6'4", whatever he is? He's a big person. And you might want to recruit, internally from active people. Hey, on the presidential detail, on this POTUS detail, we got to have 6'3" or above guys or people on this detail.
Well, you saw who walked him into the Milwaukee Convention Center.
Yes.
The other day. All of a sudden, the detail is all guys, and they're all got to be at least 6'3".
That's exactly. Gee, I wonder why, Sam. I wonder what they saw.
All of a sudden, we've got a whole bunch of big, tall, young men standing around him.
And by the way, and this is why I alluded to the Ronald Reagan assassination attempt, because you go back, anybody can go back and look at the size of those men that surrounded Ronald. By the way, another very tall person. But this is serious business. This is not. This is like you said earlier. It's to have people feel good that we met these quotas and things like this. But when the crap hits the fan, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about lives here. We're talking about lives. We're talking about the lives of political leaders. These types of incidents, as this one did. This is a candidate for president, a former president, but a candidate. And look at the ramifications that this incident had. Can you imagine, God forbid, if something had happened or would happen to President Biden or Vice President Harris, things like this, out of really what I consider negligence. That's what this is. This is negligence. When you are not doing everything you possibly can at your disposal to fulfill the mission successfully. I want to finish up with this and get your opinion, kind of your wisdom, Sam, about where do we go from here? And I know, listen, just a couple of months away, a few months away, we're looking at an election. We're looking at the possible change of leadership in the White House, or maybe, in my opinion, actually regaining some leadership in the White House. We're looking at, possibly the control of the Senate. We are, from my point of view, hopefully looking at the retainment of the House. Where do we go from here? What are the possibilities to right this ship, and not just with the Secret Service, but as you said early in the show here today, about the entire infrastructure of the intelligence and law enforcement agency at the federal level?
Well, I think the prospects are good, assuming that Donald Trump wins, which I believe he will. Um, but what it's going to require is not, it's the way to phrase this. It's going to require kind of walking through the front door at all these agencies with a baseball bat in your hand and breaking a bunch of china. And obviously, for the record, I'm speaking metaphorically, people, so I'm not advocating.
My audience is pretty bright. There, I don't have any problem there.
I just, you never know
Yeah.
who's going to take that clip. And that, but the point is, we're way past the point of appointing a blue ribbon committee and having a long discussion and then maybe modifying some guidelines. No, I have said in meetings in D.C. in regard to the CIA, just to give you a flavor, that whoever is the director under Donald Trump in the new term needs to walk in the door and on the first day fire everyone on the top floor of the building. Obviously, I'm not talking about the admin assistants and so forth. I mean, every senior executive in that agency in their top floors, the seventh floor, needs to just pack their stuff, put it in a box, and their services are no longer required. Unfortunately, CIA's personnel structure is built that you can literally do that because they all serve at the pleasure of the president. And that's just step one, and it's not only because they've either all been guilty of malfeasance or at a minimum they've watched and said nothing, but also it's an attention-getting mechanism. It's like, do I have your attention now?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Whatever the status quo was, it doesn't exist anymore. There is no more business as usual. We're getting back to basics. We're not playing games. We're not taking the whole day off to go down and knit pride flags. If you guys want to fly one at your house, I don't care what you do on your own time, but we have serious work to do, and we need serious people. And then you just got to methodically go through it, from recruiting through training to everything, right? Who you recruit, how you bring them in, and the training has got to be toughened. And then you just got to demand performance. You're not here getting promoted based on using the right pronouns. How many sources do you have? How many sources did you recruit? Are they worth anything, or are they garbage? How much intelligence? We're only here for one reason, really, which is to produce critical intelligence. Where is it? Why don't we have it? And if you can't do it, buddy, then I guess you're fired, go home, and somebody else will take charge of Islamabad or Karachi or where. And that's got to be that kind of attitude. The way I look at it is, it would be like taking over a military unit and it's just gone to seed. And you're like, okay, we're just, we're going back to basics here, man. The days of nonsense are over. Silliness and all this virtue signaling and crap, we got to do that across the board. The bureaucracy will, of course, fight like hell. Mm-hmm. So the only way that's going to work is if the president of the United States is 100% behind you. But if you're talking about Donald Trump, I don't think that's an issue.
Well, on that, I agree with you. With everything else you said today, I do. And the reason is, Sam, you really are just a bright light of common sense, experience, and articulation. And with that said, Anthony, please link to Sam's article in Primus about this incident, Secret Service in general, and this incident this past Saturday specifically. Sam, as usual, it's been a pleasure. Very grateful to have you on, and looking forward to the next time. And hopefully next time we'll have something to celebrate and talk about, and where we go from that point. God bless you, ladies and gentlemen. Pass it around, share it. Look for us on YouTube as much as you can. That helps out a great deal. Let all your friends know. Everybody needs to be in the game. Everybody needs to hear people like Sam Faddis. And we need to do something to fight back and change this tide. Sam, thanks a lot. God bless you. We'll see you next time. God bless everybody. God bless America. Thanks a lot.